Hi, tribe. Welcome back. This is part 2 to day 3. I will link part 1 below. Okay? So in part 1, we review Genesis chapters 15, 16, 17. Part 2, 18, 19, 20, and 21. All right? Let's get into it, okay? In chapter 18... it starts off with 3 visitors. So Abraham is sitting outside the tent. 3 visitors come. He rushes to serve them. He has Sarah bake some bread. He goes and chose a calf, quote, to be prepared. So it says in verse... So it says in verse 3, if I have found favor in your eyes, do not pass your servant by. Let water be brought, wash your feet, and rest. Let me get you something to eat. And I think that this is included in the scriptures. It just shows what a kind man Abraham was, how he really had the servant's heart, right, to serve, because they're strangers. And he makes this amazing gesture by getting them food to eat. And because of that, I think that they ask in verse 9, where is your wife Sarah? There in the tent, he said. Then the Lord said, I will surely return to you this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And then Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years. Sarah was past the age of childbearing in verse 11. In verse 12, so Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure? And again, so Abraham laughed and now Sarah's laughing. And I really honestly think that it is included to show the humanity of these people. I think we study these people in whether it's church or Bible studies, or did you guys have vacation Bible school? That 1 week in the summer at your church? I grew up with that. But anywho, we view these as Bible characters, but we have to remember, if you believe that the Bible is a text that is truthful, that these are people too, and they have emotions just like we have emotions. And I'm sure they had doubt just like we doubt sometimes. And so she laughed because she's like, I'm so old. How am I going to have this child? I have that in... So in verse 12, she laughs too. The next half, the second half of this chapter 18, I have that Abraham pleads for Sodom, okay? It says that in verse 17, the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation. All nations on earth will be blessed through him. I have chosen him. It says in verse 20, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin is so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry. The men turned away and went towards Sodom. But then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous? And then the Lord says, no, I will save it if you can find 50 righteous. He asked the same question about 45. The Lord says, I will spare if we can find 45 righteous. Then he asks about 30. Then he asks about 20. And then it ends the chapter, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. So Abraham pleads about the city, Sodom, not being destroyed. And the Lord said, if you can find 10 righteous people, I will not destroy it. So then we go into chapter 19. 2 angels arrived at Sodom, and Lot was sitting at the gateway of the city. And in this chapter, guys, it goes between angels and men. So it's my opinion that these 2 angels appeared as men, but they were angels, if that makes sense. And so he says in verse 2, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. And initially they say no. Nope, we're going to go to the city square. He asked them again, please stay with me. And they stayed with him. But in verse 5, before they had gone to bed, so in verse 4, it says, before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. In verse 5, they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. And again, I think that this shows the wickedness and evil that was in Sodom, that all these men, no matter what their age were, wanted to have relations with these two strangers. And so, of course, Lot, who had invited these men to stay with him, did not want that to happen. And so he instead offers his virgin daughters. But these ladies were not acceptable. And these people, the citizens of Sodom, moved to break down his door. They were that evil, I have in my notes. I have in verse 11, the two men struck the intruders with blindness. I'll read that out loud. It says, they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so they could not find the door. And again, I think that it just shows the urgency of the evilness of the inhabitants of the city of Sodom. And so they said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons of daughters, anyone else who belongs to you? Get them out now. Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. It says in verse 12 and in verse 13, because we're going to destroy this place, the outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So he follows their direction. So Lot went and spoke to his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, hurry, get out of this place. The Lord's about to destroy it. They thought he was joking. And as I was reading this, I was just thinking about the church that I went to for 20 years when I first moved to New York City. One of the things that I loved about the church was that we had something called life groups. So we had smaller Bible studies throughout the week, and that's where you really got to learn the word, to dig deep into the Bible study, but also to be mentored by those who had been walking with the Lord longer than you or more mature than you. And that's probably what I miss the most, is that mentorship and that leadership, because if they had listened to Lot, they would have saved their very lives. And so in verse 15 of chapter 19, with the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept when the city is punished. And they told him to go to the mountains. But in verse 18, Lot says, no, my lords, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes. I cannot flee to the mountains. The disaster will overtake me and I'll die. There's a town near enough to run to. It is small. Please let me flee to it. It is very small. Then my life will be spared. And so Lot did not, I have my notes, Lot did not think he could make it to the mountains. He asks that, is it pronounced Zoar, to be spared. And so they agree. They say, flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. Zoar, Z-O-A-R. And they tell him, so they agree to let Lot and with his wife and his two daughters flee to Zoar. But he says in verse 17, it says, as soon as they brought them out, they said, flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the plain. And so that was a direct direction. Flee. They said, flee to Zoar. Do not look back. And it says that in verse 26, you guys, Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. Again, I think that there are times in our lives where God requires absolute obedience. There are. And if you're not obedient, there are consequences. But I'm sure like what a hardship that was for Lot. Not only did his future son-in-laws not even believe him, but his wife was not purely obedient, and then she did look back and he lost her. Alrighty. So I have that in verse 26. Lot's wife looked back. They were told in verse 17, do not look back. In verse 30, Lot's daughters conspired to, quote, preserve the family line, and they both slept with their father. That didn't sit well with me. I read that passage twice. And the fact that the matter is that they got their father to drink wine. So they had him inebriated. He couldn't even tell when they were coming or going. And they both got impregnated by him. We are not going to understand everything in this text, you guys. But yeah, if you have any comments about that section, please put them in the comments below. Alrighty, so we're now into chapter 20. We go back to Abraham. He moved on from there into the region of Negev, and he stayed there for a while. Again, in verse 2, I have in chapter 20, Abraham repeated his actions of chapter 12 by telling Abimelech, the king, that Sarah was his sister. So he did it once. God revealed it to them. Oh, no. He done that before in chapter 12. If you remember, he had told Sarai at that time to make sure that the king knows that you are my sister, so they will spare me. He repeats that action, guys, again in chapter 20, verse 2. But God did appear to King Abimelech in a dream, disclosing to him that Sarah was married. And in verse 11, I have in my notes, Abimelech asks why Abraham lied to him. And in verse 12, Abraham replies, I said to myself, In verse 11, Abraham replied, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Verse 12, besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. So I guess that would consider a half-sister. It's a technicality I have in my notes. It's a technicality. And I put in my notes that, again, Abraham was again overcome with fear. He put his trust in Sarah and now King Abimelech instead of God. But in verse 17, Abraham prayed to God on behalf of King Abimelech. God did heal him and his household. We are on to chapter 21, the birth of Isaac. I have in my notes that God's promise was fulfilled. Sarah birthed Isaac. And then, so now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and as he had said, and the Lord, so it starts off, chapter 21 starts off, now the Lord, verse 1, was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. I just honestly, guys, it's just amazing to me how faithful God is. When he makes a promise, he always comes through. And we have to remember that sometimes promises come through not on our time, but in God's time, which is always the perfect time. Abraham, in verse 3, gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him when he was 8 days old. Again, Abraham was obedient, and he circumcised Isaac as God had commanded him. All right. I have later in this chapter, the second half of this chapter, Sarah had Hagar and Ishmael banished. But in verse 20, I think it was jealousy, right? Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had borne to Abram, was mocking. And she said to Abram, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And so again, Abraham listens to God. The next morning, he gave her some food and some water. But what I thought was just so beautiful, you guys, was verse 20. It says, God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. And so again, they were banished. So before they fled, they're back and they were banished. But God was still faithful to Hagar and to Ishmael. So the second half of chapter 21. Abimelech tells Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness I have shown to you. And Abraham swears it. And then Abraham complains to Abimelech about a well of water that his servants had seized. Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought the sheep and the cattle and gave it to Abimelech, and the two made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 lambs you have set apart by themselves? Abraham replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. And so there was a treaty. The place was called Beersheba because the 2 men swore an oath there. And Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. And that ends the review of day 3's reading. If you have not yet, please, please, please subscribe. Another shout out to my tribe members who have turned the notifications on. I invite each and every one of you. So as soon as I upload a video, you are notified. Again, I apologize. I do have to cut the video into 2 parts due to the length of it. I look forward to day 4. That's crazy, you guys. Let me get the reading for day 4. I love me a calendar, you guys. All right. So today is day 3. So for day 4, I will be reviewing Genesis chapters 20 through Genesis chapter 28. All right. Continue to get active in the comments below. Any observations, anything you agree with what I say, you disagree. I welcome all feedback. And I will see you in tomorrow's video. Happy reading. Bye for now.